Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak in support of the Budget Accountability and Oversight Committee Bill 2025, and I want to start by commending the member for Murchison for bringing this bill to us in this place and for her hard work over many years to understand and scrutinise the budget. Certainly not an easy task. Acknowledge the member for Hobart, acknowledge the efforts of the member for Murchison as well. And I, as I said, rise to speak in support of the bill, and quite frankly don't often find myself feeling frustrated and struggling to understand other views in this place, Mr President, because I do my absolute best to understand other perspectives and respect them, but I've been rather astounded at the shock and concern about this bill. My initial reactions on reading it were, what a great idea, and thank God someone is doing something about this. So I've been quite taken aback to learn that members appear to be so super concerned about a potential overreach of power that may contravene the Westminster principles when, I'm really concerned about saving our bacon. Whilst I do my best to genuinely understand and respect others' views, I must admit, as I said, I'm struggling in this instance, and I found that response from the government quite hard to listen to. But I acknowledge that those who take a contrary view to mine...
just what I said?
It wasn't the way you said it at all, Leader. Not at all. No disrespect to you at all. I appreciate and respect that that is the position of the government, and they similarly may not like mine, and that's totally okay, because that's the wonderful privilege we have of living in a democracy. Mr President, the way I see it, the problem we're trying to solve here is that our state is in a financial crisis, a budget situation worse than it's ever been, according to all reports, quickly heading into $13 billion of debt with no meaningful reform planned to stop us falling off the cliff. The solution proposed through this bill is to establish a committee to take a good hard look at the financial situation and make recommendations to the government as to what might help fix it. I started wondering if I'd been reading a different bill to the government on hearing that reply. Alternatively, we can simply continue to lament how bad it is and whinge and moan about the irresponsibility of the government. And I'm sure we'll all be doing some of that next week when we deliver budget replies. We can spend hours scrutinising expenditure and estimates hearings for no real meaningful outcomes, and most certainly no improvements to the financial situations of Tasmanians. I'm not so sure about my fellow honourable members, but I simply cannot sit back and watch the executive government plunge our state further into financial crisis and do nothing more than call them out on it, because I'm worried that suggesting what they should consider doing about it risks stepping on their toes. What damage could stepping on their toes possibly do? Anyway, I'm struggling to recognise any seriously adverse consequences here. In the briefings over the last week, I've heard suggestions that the Parliament is here to review the actions of the executive government, not to tell it what to do. Well, again, while I respect that as a different take to it on mine, it does come as surprising news to me. I hear members calling on the government to do things all the time, through motions and in the media. I hear members making suggestions on behalf of the people we represent all the time. Committees, Mr President, make recommendations all the time. I cannot see how this bill is proposing something fundamentally different. Recommendations to government are all this bill provides for, a mechanism to have a good hard look at the state's financial position and make recommendations to government on financial targets, monitoring, budget processes and repair, and fiscal sustainability. Personally, I feel it is our role as a parliament, to collectively as members wanting to protect Tasmania's best interests, to be doing anything we possibly can to get the government to recognise the need for serious intervention and meaningful reform. In fact, when I first read the bill, I thought, I wonder if it could be amended to strengthen what the government has to do with the recommendations. Making recommendations binding on the government would most certainly be an overreach. Obviously now I realise that, but that's where my mind was initially going. In the briefing we had with Professor Richard Herr last week on this bill, he shared his view that parliamentary supremacy does not extend to micromanaging the administration of the government, as the member for Hobart also touched on. He said government is responsible to the people for what it does, not for what the Parliament tells it to do. But, Mr President, desperate times call for desperate measures, and we most certainly are in desperate times. Let's ponder for a minute what could possibly happen if the Parliament doesn't intervene here and the state goes broke. Who will be intervening then? If we don't do it, And we may end up needing a bailout by the feds. And then could be the federal government that may be micromanaging the administration of the Tasmanian government. And we will have missed our chance. It will be the feds who are calling the shots, recommending targets and processes and repair measures, not the people Tasmanians democratically elected to represent them. So far as I see it, that's the risk we're accepting if we do not support this bill. This risk has been identified across the country already, with senior economist Shane Wright reporting on Tasmania's economy going south in the Sydney Morning Herald last week on 30th of October. Mr Wright stated if Tasmania fails to get its debt and interest levels under control, the federal government will be left carrying the can for the Apple Isle taxpayers. Personally, I want to be able to say to the people that I represent that I, hand on heart, did everything I possibly could to understand and formulate ideas on how to repair our dire budget situation. I recognised it was in dire straits and supported and contributed to every opportunity I had to make it better. As Professor Herr also said in the briefing last week, historically the representative function of the Parliament set in train in the evolution of Parliament's duty to ensure that the people's interests are represented and protected. That has resulted today in the Parliament being the supreme organ of governance in this Westminster system of democracy. I can't, in good conscience, face a struggling taxpayer and tell them that I didn't support the establishment of a Budget Accountability and Oversight Committee because it risked overstepping Westminster conventions in maybe being an overreach of Parliament authority. They would say, give me a spell. And I don't believe it does risk being an overreach anyway, especially not now it's been weakened through amendments to recommend targets rather than establish targets. Recommend targets rather than establish targets. In fact, no one has specifically articulated a specific Westminster principle or convention that this proposed committee overreaches. I've only heard broad generalisation that it blurs the separation of powers or the doctrine of responsible government. How do I explain to a taxpayer what that means? I heard the leader in the government's reply note that this would represent a significant shift in Tasmania's governance model. Well, things have shifted in Tasmania and we are in a minority government. And anyway, what are the consequences if it is an overreach? Do we have to explain ourselves and apologise to the King? The sky is not going to fall in if we pass this bill to establish a budget repair committee today. And we should, Mr President, for Tasmanians. Again, touching on the government's response to the bill, I note honourable members received a letter from Treasurer Betts pointing out a number of concerns that he as Treasurer has about the bill. What I say in response is that I see the aim being to help here, not to hinder. And if the government was going to oppose the establishment of committee and write to honourable members, perhaps it would have been helpful in that letter to outline what the executive government is actually doing to repair the budget. Because I have absolutely no idea. Tasmanians have no idea, Mr President, and that is simply not right. The only specific initiative the Treasurer referred to in that letter was that the government has established a multi-partisan budget consultation panel. That is a strategy that is already providing the opportunity for non-government members of the House of Assembly to engage strategically on long-term fiscal strategy, budget repair initiatives and the development of the Tasmanian budget. Mr President, this panel was not established through the Parliament. It does not have representatives from both houses of the Parliament. It does not hold public hearings. It does not publish minutes or outcomes of its meetings, and it has no requirement to report to the Parliament or to the people of Tasmania. I wonder what budget repair initiatives they have engaged on in the first 4 meetings so far. In response to claims that the Public Accounts Committee can fulfil the purpose of this bill, I agree. Yes, it could. But the way I see it, the PAC's role is typically reactive, scrutinising spending decisions. The proposed committee's role is proactive, and proactivity is something that we simply don't see enough of because we simply don't make time for it. Governments certainly don't seem to have or make time for it. We operate in the urgent, immediate sphere way too much, out of necessity. Having a separate committee clearly sets the tone of proactivity, enabling members and Secretariat to be in that particular headspace when the committee is convened. Establishing a specific committee under statute demonstrates to Tasmanians that we as a Parliament are dead serious about this. It's the Parliament making a statement that it is taking the financial position of our state seriously and doing everything in its power to help address it, for the people that we are so privileged to represent and serve in this place. It's bringing elected members and the people we represent on the journey to budget repair. It's about transparency. It will improve financial literacy of us as members and of the public. It's interesting to hear some members say that they would be happy for PAC to do an inquiry to look into the things being proposed as the committee's role and function in this bill. Because then I ask, well, how and why is this then not unconstitutional? I'm not sure. As for the government's comments that the budget is already the subject of significant scrutiny through the normal legislative processes and the budget estimates hearings, well, how effective are these processes, I ask? Mr President, what do you think Tasmanians think about the time and resources put into Budget Estimates Week? For what outcomes, other than finding out some more information about specific initiatives, opportunities for non-government members to seek some gotcha moments and ministers trying to avoid these at all costs? In fact, I spoke about this in my budget reply speech in June. During my contribution, I noted that the government has had plenty of time to stand up and listen to calls to reform the budget. The member for Murchison has been conveying significant concern for some time, as have other members of Parliament. There have been solutions suggested. There have been goodwill offers of wanting to work together to find solutions, as Tasmanians rightly expect us to do. But the government instead ploughs on, seemingly forgetting they are leading in minority, that they don't have a mandate, that they actually do need to work together with all other members to deliver for Tasmanians. The government is ignoring the richness and diversity of our collective intelligence in this and the other place, what the 50 of us could achieve working together. If the government isn't going to put mechanisms in place to do this, the Parliament can, and in my view, it should. In my budget reply speech, I spoke of my experience of budget development at Glenorchy City Council. I shared that our budget process involved a series of workshops beginning in around October and going through until June. Everyone came together to discuss priorities and ideas informed by the advice of each department of council. We also engaged with the community about its priorities to help inform our decision making. Now, I'm not saying this was perfect, and I'm not saying a committee of Parliament should take on the role of the executive. That is not what I'm saying. I want to be clear about that, Mr President. I know councils are different and operate under a different system. But as I asked back in June, why can't we look at doing something similar that brings members on the journey to understanding here? And if 50 members is too unwieldy, what about a budget committee, I asked back in June in my budget reply, and here we are. What we know is the current process is not working. It is not satisfactory to most non-government members. It doesn't effectively serve the people we represent. We are rushed in delivering a budget reply, and then the next week, government administration committees will spend hundreds of hours collectively and staff scrutinising the budget line by line, questioning ministers for some answers to explain things that aren't clear in the numbers or the commentary presented. This budget estimates process consumes enormous amounts of resources, both during the week, in our time, ministers' time, and the time of departmental staff and advisors who support ministers. Consumes significant resources of government department staff and advisors who spend thousands of hours collectively on taxpayer money in preparing huge folders full of information for budget estimates. All for what? As I've said, certainly no material change. It's too late. Why not have these conversations before the budget is finalised? Let's do things differently. I would have liked to see a new budget development process set out in this bill, but I can see again now that most likely this would have been definitely seen as an overreach. So I'm satisfied that the bill refers to the development of the budget and scrutiny processes as being one of the matters for the committee to examine and report on. Mr President, let's imagine what would happen if the same expectations of local government applied to state government when it comes to governance and financial management. Perhaps that's something this proposed committee could gather evidence on, because if a council was managing its budget and major projects like the government has been, and if there was as much dysfunction around the table as there has been, it would most likely be put into administration pending a Board of Inquiry review. In fact, this is what happened at Glenorchy City Council back in 2016-17, and although costly, it was necessary for a reset. As a result, there was not only an election to bring in a new council, but also a series of ministerial directions setting out over 50 actions the council was to undertake to restore good governance. This became the council's priority, and it worked. Glenorchy City Council became referred to as the turnaround council, but it likely wouldn't have happened without the guidance and direction of that Board of Inquiry. I'll wind up, Mr President. In this new world, for Tasmania at least, of minority government, we've got to get comfortable with doing things differently. Challenge convention. Try new ways of working if we are to achieve the best outcomes for the people we are so privileged to represent. I predict many of us will be lamenting the state of the budget as we do budget replies next week. Well, this is our chance not just to complain about it and heap blame on the government, but to help do something meaningful about it. I won't miss it. We're in survival mode here in Tasmania, Mr. President. We need this committee. The government doesn't realise it or want to admit it, but it needs this committee, and most importantly, Tasmanians need and deserve this committee. I support the bill.